Good morning and welcome everyone to our conversation starter session today. Our topic today will be data losses and or breaches of data and what is the impact for you as a director of the business. My name is Bruce Silkstone and I will be your host for today. I'm a regional manager in the Nedbank Financial Planning division within Nedbank Wealth Cluster. The purpose of the conversation starter is to engage with our clients in an informal virtual environment where we can hold richer conversations. We will also answer some questions from our Thought Leadership webinar, which was held on the 20th of October around cybersecurity, where Jason E. Street, who's an international real-life hacker and social engineer, took us through his personal stories and shared some tips on how to protect yourself and your business from cybercrime. But before we get into that, I'd just like to share with you what it is that we do at Nedbank Private Wealth and Nedbank Financial Planning. We use our globally integrated and advice-led approach to connect your financial decisions to your goals and aspirations. We do this by connecting your goals and needs, dreams, fears, attitudes, and the role you play in your community to how you earn, save, and spend. We call this connected wealth, with which through our globally integrated advice makes these threads more visible and therefore more manageable. It also connects you in the solution services and expertise that you need to make the most of your money and achieve your definitions of success. Should you wish to know more, please feel free to speak to your banker or financial advisor in Nedbank. Just before we jump into our topics today, just some housekeeping rules, please. Please use your Q&A chat box on your left-hand side of your submit questions during the webinar. If your screen happens to freeze during the webinar, press the refresh button and it will take you back to where you stopped in the session. You'll receive an email in the next few days with the link to the recording of the conversation starter in case you'd like to share this or watch it again. Please remember that you can get more thought leadership insights and recordings of our previous webinars and find out more about future webinars on our website. Without any further delays, let's jump straight in. Today's topic and presentation will be on how can directors be held liable in their personal capacity should a company's customer data be hacked and held ransom, or customers' personal data get in the wrong hands, and how do companies and individuals protect and insure themselves against the risk. To help us navigate through these tough questions, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Christelle van Berg from our Wealth Division, who is also our head of broker channel at Nedbank Insurance. Christelle will give us a brief introduction into the topic after I will be introducing to you our main speaker, Simon Coleman, who is the head of SHA, a division of Santam. So without any further ado, Christelle, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruce. Yes, so I think for me, in the world of insurance, we've seen where we've partnered with a lot of our customers through our risk advisors, and they have navigated and assisted our clients understanding how insurance can assist in this world around data breaches and cyber security and cyber losses. I think it's so important to have the right advice next to you, somebody that you understand what is the implications and also understand how you could protect your business or yourself against these things. I think, and that's why within Nedbank Insurance, we've made a point of it of educating both our customers as well as our stakeholders and partnering with the likes of Simon and the team to make sure that when these things happen, we do the heavy lifting through our risk advisors to make sure that the client can go through a very uncomfortable, I think, situation sometimes, and making sure that the necessary steps are taken to safeguard the business. So I think that is really the role of Nedbank Insurance and working with the wealth management team and through our risk advisors to answer these tough, difficult questions sometimes customers don't understand and who sometimes gets difficult to understand and navigate to make sure that you've got the right insurance. So what must I buy? What shouldn't I buy? What cover should I have? Do I have enough cover? And I think sometimes it's just great to know that there's somebody out there that works with the bank, with the wealth management team to make sure that we can answer those and guide our customers. So I'm not going to say too much. Simon's really the specialist on the topic. He's one of our great partners in our world. So over back to you. Thanks, Bruce.
Christelle, thanks very much. I think it is great for our clients to know that there is somebody out there who they can turn to for assistance. Our next speaker is Simon Coleman, who's head of our digital and financial lines at SHH Risk Specialist, a division of Santam. allow me to give you some insight into our main speaker. Simon has over 28 years of experience in the insurance and reinsurance industry as a liability and cybercrime specialist. He also served on the Road Accident Fund Insurance Committee in 1998 and 1999 under Judge Kathy Satchwell. Simon has worked in the television industry as a host of the Business Day TV's At Law work. He is a head judge on The Insurance Apprentice and is a regular guest on ENCA's Moneyline, as well as a frequent contributor to articles in the Argus, The Star, Citizen, Sowetan, and various other publications. He holds various qualifications from MIT and Columbia Business School in the US. Simon will be taking us through a short presentation that will be giving us insight into what he calls the leadership insomnia, with specific focus on data breaches, losses, and impact on business leaders. Thank you, Simon. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce. And thank you, Christelle. And yeah, good morning to all of you, wherever you are. I'm hoping at some point to get to do these presentations in person again. But I guess we've all grown quite comfortable with this format. I'm going to be talking to you today, as you've already heard, about cybercrime. And then we're going to just sort of move the conversation into what the impact is on business leaders or directors of business. I'm also going to be touching on some personal experience that I've had with cybercrime. I'm not a cyber criminal or a hacker, but probably like many of you on the call today, I've also fallen victim to this. So I'm just going to be unpacking that in a moment. I've been involved with cyber insurance and cyber risk since 2011. So long before we started having these big data breaches in South Africa. And I know the insurance industry is often accused of being a little bit behind the curve when it comes to new risks. But we've had this insurance product available for a long time. And I'm pleased to say, although I say that with respect, and obviously if you've suffered a cyber attack recently and you didn't have insurance, now's the time to reconsider it. But recently, we've really noticed a massive uptick in cyber attacks and, of course, the sale of cyber insurance. It is becoming as common as theft or burglary insurance for a lot of people. And I think that that's because the crime is so widespread and it has a viral nature. I mean, before the pandemic hit us, when we spoke about viral effects, we always spoke about social media or cybercrime. And that is really the way that we should be thinking about it. It's affecting everybody. Some of you may have already been affected at some point, but there are things that we can do about it as individuals. And of course, for those of you that have your own businesses or are directors, there are things that we can do in our businesses to protect ourselves and perhaps more importantly, our customers and our employees, who are, of course, often the victims of these cyber attacks when they happen. So I'm going to transport you back in time a little bit. This is me. This is a screenshot of my personal blog, my website, which is liabilityguy.co.za. And I use this really just to jot down my thoughts. I write some articles on cybercrime and a number of other things. And I'm very proud of the fact that I built this website myself using WordPress. I'm not a techie, so it was kind of a live and learn as I was putting this together. I've had this website for probably about 5 years. I'm not punting my website here because my personal cyber attack story relates to this website. So I published a couple of articles probably in January of 2021, one in December, another one in January. And these had to do with cyber attacks. And I'd recently received a phishing email and I decided to write an article about it. And then following that, I decided to embark on an exercise of changing all of my passwords. And over the years, I'd accumulated quite a number of them. And I was also one of the guilty parties where I was reusing my credentials because I couldn't remember all these different passwords. And that is of course, a danger when you're interacting online. But we'll talk more about that later. So January of 2021, I published these articles, and almost immediately after that, in my website, I have something that monitors traffic that's coming into my website, including attempted cyber attacks. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there that within a month, I'd had 1,258 brute force attacks. Brute force attacks are really where the hackers are trying to guess at the password and username combination. They use pieces of technology to do this quite quickly. So I kept an eye on this, and within a couple of months, the number had kind of jumped up to around about 5,000 attacks. I do have security on my website, paid security. I'm not using any free applications. So I was quite confident that my website was secure. Anyway, I don't publish things all the time on the site, so I hadn't visited it for a couple of months when somebody contacted me and said, look, I was looking for that article that you published, and this is the screen that popped up when I clicked on the article. And really what this was, I went in, I tried all of the menu items on my blog, and every single one of those took me to the same page. These little streamers kind of come down the screen, advising whoever it is that's viewing the site that they've won an iPhone or a prize in this case. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get this to disappear. I also had no logs that showed anybody had accessed the back end of my website. For someone who's in cybersecurity, cyber risk, of course, this is quite embarrassing because I've just published articles trying to tell people how to protect themselves, and then I myself get hacked. So long story short, somebody used one of the plugins that I use on WordPress. That was compromised, and that's how they got into my site. Only after I deleted that plugin, which is a little application that I was using, did I manage to get this off the site. So it was kind of an awakening for me, and I think for a lot of people, particularly in the SME sector, you know, we often think that, you know, I don't transact on my website. I don't collect credit card information or even personal information of the people who visit my site. So I had assumed that I was not a target. I think when I published those articles, I probably fell victim to, you know, some amateur hacker who went, oh, really, you're an expert, you know, let me show you something. But small businesses in particular, small to medium-sized businesses are actually hacked all the time. And one of the things we're seeing more and more often is ransomware. I'm going to share some stats with you in a moment. What I also decided to do in this exercise, as I mentioned earlier, was change all of my passwords. And a study was done by Google last year, where they estimated that it was around about 65% of internet users are guilty of credential reuse or credential recycling. In other words, you use the same username and password combination on multiple websites. And often we think about this and we go, well, you know, it's on LinkedIn or it's on TripAdvisor that I've reused these passwords and usernames. The bank obviously has more involved security when you're engaging on your banking profile, and you've got multi-factor authentication and things like that. So you tend to focus more on the financial elements or the financial websites that you're transacting on, and we tend to ignore the other sites. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that when there's a large-scale breach, and LinkedIn was hacked in 2016, I received a notification at the time telling me that my username and password had probably been compromised and that I needed to change it. I didn't change it immediately. I just left it because I knew that I didn't have any financial information stored on LinkedIn. Now, the hackers, when they do this, what they're really trying to achieve is get a list of usernames and passwords and then take advantage of that element of laziness that we have of reusing those same usernames and passwords. And they use that to log into other sites. And there you might have a little bit more financial information. Your ID may be stored there. So if you are one of those people that reuse your usernames and passwords, I can recommend the one that I started using is called LastPass. It's a password manager app, very secure. It uses multi-factor authentication so that if somebody does happen to get hold of that password, at least you've got some additional security. But you can create a password that is up to 99 characters long. Now, what I'm showing you right now is a study that was done by the Insurance Crime Bureau earlier this year. And you can see there down the left-hand side of this very colorful picture that if you've got 4 characters in your password and it's only numbers, a hacker can basically crack that instantly. They've got technology that can do that, even if you combine it with numbers, upper and lowercase letters and symbols. It takes absolutely no time to hack it. As you go further down the page, you'll see if you have 18 characters in your password and it's just numbers, on average, it takes a hacker 9 months to crack that. Now, you know, the bigger the syndicate is, the more technology they'll have access to, and they might be able to do it quicker than that. Most people cannot remember a password of 18 characters, which is why we have to use things like password managers. And you can see there, if you combine it, numbers, upper and lowercase letters, you're looking at 7QD, which I think is quintillion years, which is a long time for a hacker to try and get into your profile. And of course, hackers, much like the burglars that operate in our neighborhoods, are easily dissuaded to move on to the next victim if it's taking too long to crack the password. Of course, if you're in the high net worth category, like many of you are on this call, the hacker might be sufficiently motivated to continue the exercise, obviously not for 1 billion years. But if you do this and you go more than 18 characters, you've really added an extra layer of security that's going to make it quite difficult. So just in your personal capacity, I would recommend you look at using a password manager, a reputable one, a paid one, not a free one on the internet, and it'll give you a lot of peace of mind and will protect you even on those websites where you think you don't have confidential information stored. So I'm going to move into the business sector now. You know, how big is this issue that's facing, and I'm going to focus on SMEs. Apologies if some of you work in corporates. A lot of these principles do apply there. But at SHA, which is a division of Santam, where we specialize in things like cyber risk, we do an annual risk review where we talk to 1,000 business owners. And the last one we did was in 2020. And these are some of the issues that we picked up. So amongst this group of business owners, we were told already in 2020 that 30% of them had already sustained some kind of cyber attack in the preceding 24 months. When we say cyber attack, we're normally talking about hacking. It could be the example that I used on my own website, but in many instances, you can see there 82% of those that were hacked said that they suffered some degree of business interruption following the cyber attack. In other words, they were offline for a sufficient amount of time for it to interrupt their business activities. Some businesses cannot trade if they're offline, particularly if you're running an online retail operation. A lot of guest houses, B&Bs, those sort of things also can't trade. And in fact, when we started drilling into what types of businesses had sustained these attacks, we also noted that there were a lot of manufacturers that were included in this business interruption loss. A lot of businesses do use process automation to run their operations. And of course, if those pieces of equipment can connect to the internet and they get ransomware on them, it's the same as if you had a fire in your factory. You cannot operate. There's an absolute shutdown. One of the businesses we spoke to said that he was using some old technology, and the business that had supplied this had actually closed down some years ago. So they were actually unable to get a patch or to get back up and running again. And they ended up having to invest in a whole new processing system so that they could get up and running. They were offline for a couple of weeks, and the loss ran into the many millions. So that is the state of things. That was in 2020. We're busy conducting our 2021 risk review now, and it looks like the number has escalated over the last 12 months, which is to be expected because we've seen that in corporate South Africa as well. Why would SMEs be excluded? Some disturbing risk management that we picked up. A lot of the smaller businesses that we spoke to still maintained that they didn't believe they had an exposure. And the response we got from those businesses was generally, I don't store confidential information belonging to my clients, so I don't believe that I am a target of a hack attack. And of course, the issue there is that these, especially the large-scale cyber attacks like we're seeing with ransomware, those are often completely random attacks. They rely on a lack of awareness in the business, somebody sitting behind a computer and clicking on a link that then releases the ransomware into the system. A lot of antivirus programs don't pick up ransomware either. So the best way of dealing with that is through education and awareness. But so quite disturbing that almost half of the respondents still believed that they didn't have an exposure, in spite of the fact that, as you just saw on the previous slide, that 30% of businesses had already suffered some kind of cyber attack. 40% of the respondents said that they were relying on free antivirus software that they downloaded off the internet. There are a lot of these antivirus packages available. Not all of them are dangerous, but some are themselves malware or contain viruses. And often a user on the internet is tricked into downloading them. You know, a message will pop up on the screen saying we've detected a virus on your computer. Download our antivirus software to fix the problem. So those free antivirus packages often are contaminated themselves. But also something to bear in mind, even the reputable ones. So if you download a free version of Norton's, say, they do warn you that these programs are only updated every 30 days. So you get an automatic update every 30 days. Now, in a Symantec report, which is Norton's holding company, 2 years ago, they estimated that there were 2 million new viruses being released into the internet every day. Now, of course, if you wait 30 days to update your antivirus software, you've got potentially 60 million new viruses that your antivirus software doesn't know about, and it's not going to detect. So spending that sort of 600-700 Rand a year on Kaspersky or Norton's or one of the others, McAfee's a very good one, you know, it really doesn't make sense to not spend that money and to use these free antivirus packages. I also just want to pause here for a second. In businesses where they do have good antivirus protection, what we also found was that they, particularly where they were engaging with service providers or other businesses that were providing services to them, they often didn't ask any questions of their service providers as to what their cybersecurity looked like. Do you have antivirus? Do you have firewalls? Those sort of questions. I'm simplifying, obviously, the nature of cyber risk management, but those are really the basics that you would expect every business to have. And of course, if a service provider doesn't have these things in place and they fall victim to an attack, this can, of course, blow back onto your business as well. So it's important to just extend that sort of risk assessment to beyond the business and to ask those questions, much like you would ask a contractor if they've got their own liability insurance or something like that before they engage in work with you. 27% of the businesses we spoke to said that they don't do regular backups, and that was a backup that was done more than once a week. What is the issue with this? Well, ransomware relies on the fact that many businesses don't do backups. So when we interrogated this, we found that 1 in 5 businesses said that they'd had a ransomware attack specifically. Ransomware, of course, being a piece of technology that locks up or encrypts your computers, which means nobody can actually access any of the files or information on the system. So 1 in 5 businesses said that they'd been attacked. We then said, okay, so you were attacked. Now, you know, the way ransomware works is, of course, the hackers will demand a payment of a ransom before they will release the decryption key. Most of the time, they do release the key if the ransom is paid. This is generally paid in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency. Just over a third of the businesses that had been attacked said that they'd paid the ransom. They also told us that the average ransom, remember this is in the SME sector, was somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000, so around about $700-800. I realize, as I mentioned, dollars, the number's probably getting bigger. I don't know if you saw the news this morning. These ransoms are relatively low, particularly for individuals like ourselves, and of course for small businesses, because that's what makes this crime work. The hackers want you to pay the ransom. So the amount is low enough for it to be a viable solution. And of course, if you don't have backups, then your only option really is to restart from scratch or to pay the ransom. And as you can see there, a third paid the ransom. I don't have a slide for it, but we asked a further question. We said, so you paid the ransom. Did you get your data back? The answer was almost in 100% of cases was yes. We then said, did you get hacked a second time? And 25% of those that paid the ransom confirmed that they got hit a second time within a month or two of paying that ransom. So of course, if the initial crime is completely random, relying on a person who doesn't have awareness of cybercrime to click on an infected email, then once you pay the ransom, you move off the random list and into the paying list. You are now the cash cow that is guaranteed to pay. So that is something to bear in mind. I'm not encouraging you to pay ransoms by any stretch of the imagination. We actually provide insurance cover for this, but we do insist that businesses have backups so that it's an absolute last resort to pay those ransoms. Word coming out of the USA is that the law enforcement authorities are probably going to make it illegal to pay ransoms, certainly in the USA, and this will of course extend to other territories. And this type of insurance cover for ransom specifically is likely to not be available over the next couple of years. So it is something to keep an eye on. Ransomware is by far the biggest threat to South African businesses at the moment. If you work in a corporate, then we start moving away from ransom and we start talking about extortion. You would have seen some of the well-publicized attacks over the last few months. Probably the biggest one we saw was Transnet. And there, of course, you have a double threat because the hackers will demand a payment, normally running into the many millions of dollars, to firstly provide the decryption key, but also to not release confidential information out into the public. And a lot of corporates do end up paying these ransoms purely because of that extortion and that threat that faces their business from a public relations perspective. So having good security and backups and, of course, proper education of staff is really the best way to counteract this. Even in a large financial institution where billions are spent on cybersecurity, the weakest link is always the employee. Somebody who without thinking clicks on something that they shouldn't click on. And of course, that's our biggest challenge. It's also the cheapest form of risk management, of course, that education element. So let's take a look at how this affects directors and business owners, business leaders, I like to refer to them as. The stakes are obviously very high. So if we look at our duties as directors and officers, as the Companies Act refers to this group of people as. Sorry, there's a bit of text on there. I don't expect you to read all of it. But what we really refer to here is the Companies Act. If you're a director of a business, then you have certain fiduciary duties or obligations that have been thrust upon you by the Act. Okay, so all directors have to exercise their powers in good faith and, of course, for a proper purpose, in the best interests of the company. And then it's also required that we exercise a degree of care and skill and diligence when we're conducting those duties, when we're exercising those obligations. A failure to do this, of course, does open up the door to litigation from stakeholders. And you'll note that I use the word stakeholder and not shareholder. And in particular, in a lot of privately owned companies, the directors are the only shareholders. But a stakeholder could be anybody. It could be a customer, a supplier. It could be a member of the public. It could be a regulator. It could be a shareholder, of course. It could be the company itself that brings an action against the board for failing in those duties. Now, of course, many of us here who've studied finance would have known that, setting up a PTY Limited is, of course, a wonderful way of separating the liabilities of the company from your own personal liability. But what the Companies Act does here is it pierces that corporate veil. It opens up a door for these stakeholders to take action against the business leaders if they have failed in these duties. And we're definitely seeing an increase in claims against directors. This is generally covered under what we call a directors and officers liability policy, which provides defense costs for the board and also covers damages. We've seen an uptick in claims against directors, particularly in privately owned companies. A lot of these actions are being brought by creditors, but also by the likes of SARS and other regulatory bodies. What does this have to do with cyber or digital crime? Well, it has a lot to do with it, because the dilemma, of course, facing any business leader is that much like you have to have a handle on every risk that faces your business, you have to have a focus on cyber. We know that this is an escalating crime the world over, and in particular here in South Africa. A recent study that was performed by, I think it was PwC, estimated that South Africa was in the top 5 of most cyber victims on a global basis. So we know that this is an issue. Directors are expected to know this. The challenge, of course, the dilemma, is that we need to manage this exposure, but we are not cybersecurity specialists when we're sitting on the boards of our companies. We can't plead ignorance, of course, in terms of Section 76 of the Companies Act. That is, of course, the section of the Companies Act that really says that when we're dealing with any issue as a director, that we need to take reasonably diligent steps to become informed about that matter. So it does, of course, mean we're not expected to be cybersecurity specialists, but we are expected to either contract with people that are cybersecurity specialists or deploy some kind of technology or information systems so that we can manage the exposure. It's expected of us. It would fall within the category of our fiduciary responsibilities. In bigger companies, they will appoint committees to look at these things. Some businesses have a chief information officer or a CISO, which is a cybersecurity specialist that's sitting at executive level. In smaller businesses, of course, that is a luxury that is often unaffordable, and it falls upon the directors or business owners specifically to understand and manage this risk. So if we have a lack of awareness of cyber risk as business leaders, and then we fail to implement proper security measures, it means we're facing potential litigation. Again, from a stakeholder. In the cyber context, probably your biggest stakeholders are going to be the information regulator, who can initiate a significant fine against the information officer in the company. That would be a board member, even in a small business. And that fine can be as much as 10 million rand or 10 years in prison. Okay, so this all arises out of the newly implemented POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which came into full effect on the 1st of July this year. So the other major stakeholder that I was referring to, aside from the regulator, is of course the data subjects. These are our customers and even our employees whose confidential information we may be holding. Even if you're a small business that doesn't have a lot of customer information, you will be holding data, confidential information on the employees, because that's how you initiate your payroll, tax, all that sort of thing. So we do hold some confidential information if we employ people. So the dilemma is understanding this risk and then figuring out how we navigate through this. Insurance is one part of the risk management matrix, if I can call it that. Regardless of the size of business, we do need to look at this thing holistically. So from a risk perspective, and insurance should form a part of that discussion. And that is, of course, why I'd encourage you after this session to chat to your broker at Nedbank so that they can help you understand this and put the right risk management and insurance in place. So let's just take a look at that. This is my last slide, and then I'll be happy to take some questions and engage in some conversation. So how do we defend our realm? How do we defend our business? How do we defend our personal wealth if we are directors and officers in a business? So the two areas of cover that we can focus on here, one is cyber insurance. As I said, it's not new to South Africa, although I'd say probably for the first 5 or 6 years of its existence, you only found corporate South Africa buying this type of cover. We've seen a lot of policies now being created specifically for that small and mid-market segment with pricing and cover that's more suitable for that segment. So your cyber insurance is one part of it. And then the other part, of course, is the directors and officers liability insurance. If we look at cyber, the cyber insurance, it really has 4 key elements to it. It's got what we call first-party cover. And if I can just draw a comparison to your car insurance, you'll be aware of the fact that when you insure your car, you get own damage cover, which is, of course, if your own car is damaged and you have to have it repaired. And then you get third-party cover, which is, of course, if you drive into someone else and you have to fix their car. So those are the 2 key elements of cyber as well. The first-party cover is your own damage. This is the cost of figuring out what happened to your system, getting it back up and running as quickly as possible, doing data recovery. All of those costs are included in the first-party element of the policy. And then we have the third-party cover, which is becoming increasingly important. And this is where we really deal with litigation that might come from customers or employees after there's been a cybersecurity breach. Someone asked me in a previous session if there's been an increase in cyber claims or in cyber attacks in South Africa since POPI came out, since the Protection of Personal Information legislation was fully enforced in July, because it just seems like the media is full of these things. The answer is there has been an increase in notifications, but what we think is happening here is the number of cyber attacks hasn't necessarily increased. It's just that businesses are obliged to disclose when they've been hacked now in terms of the legislation. So we're seeing an uptick in activity. Now, of course, as soon as you disclose it, which you're obliged to do in terms of POPI, that means that the data subjects who've been affected now have a way of approaching you directly. And of course, the threat of litigation increases because you've now gone public with the fact that you've been hacked. You've had to notify the people that are affected. And if they suffer some kind of loss in future, they will, of course, more than likely turn to the business where their data was compromised in the first place. So the third-party element is becoming more important. You also have a regulatory element in this policy, and this is where the policy will defend you if you are asked to appear in front of the information regulator. So that threat of that big fine, the 10 million rand, would require defense, and cyber policies do respond to provide that defense. At the present time, the fine itself is also insurable, but we do expect the regulator at some point in future to tell the insurance industry that they don't want us to cover that. But for the time being, the South African insurance market is allowed to cover those fines, and it's included in the policy. And then another element, probably more of an issue if you're in financial services or if you're in a larger business where the brand and reputation of the company can be dramatically affected by a cyber attack. Most cyber insurance policies also cover public relations services, getting a PR team in to manage the media fallout. Then the other thing that I need us to focus on, of course, when we talk about cyber is risk management, and that is deployment of the appropriate technology. Most of the insurers, I know certainly at SHA, at Santam, we provide our clients with access to technology, to education, and ways that they can actually enforce their cybersecurity protocols in a business, whether it's an SME or a larger corporate. We also provide data breach response services, and you will find this with all of the cyber insurance policies offered in South Africa, that the insurers will offer or will provide you with access to a team of people that can parachute in, get the system back up and running, and they will even negotiate with hackers if there's a ransomware or cyber extortion attack. Very useful service to have. Moving over to the corporate governance or the director's responsibilities, those fiduciary issues we spoke about. Directors and officers' liability policies are legal defense policies in essence, and they do provide the board as well as committee members and senior management with legal defense costs when it is alleged that they've failed in their fiduciary duties. Often we find that the legal defense costs run into the thousands, if not millions, and we successfully defend the board, which means there's no damages that need to be paid, although the policy does actually cover those personal liability damages that could be awarded by the court. Sorry, I just realized I have a spelling error in my governance there. But it's important to manage your directors and officers' risk with good governance. There are a number of firms of attorneys and corporate governance specialists. There's lots of training that takes place in South Africa. If you aren't a member of the Institute of Directors, I do recommend that you become a member. There's some wonderful educational programs that are offered by the IOD. And of course, your data breach response services have an impact here when it's bought in tandem with cyber insurance. Because of course, if you want to demonstrate that you haven't failed in your fiduciary responsibilities, the best way to do that is to be able to show that you've had an awareness of the cyber risk and that you've put the right measures in place to manage that exposure. And that really concludes my presentation. No death by PowerPoint. I hope I stuck to the time limit there, Bruce, and have left enough time for questions. So yeah, back to you. Happy to take some questions.
Great, thanks, Simon. Thanks for a very informative presentation. I think a lot to get our head around. We have got a couple of questions for you. So if you don't mind just sharing a little time with us. One of the questions that did pop up is, especially in today's hybrid workspace, how do you think the liability of board members will be impacted by the hybrid workspace?
Yeah, a very good question. We saw an increase in cyber attacks during especially those early stages of lockdown, because many businesses were, well, no businesses were prepared for that. I know even in corporate South Africa, we didn't have enough devices for our staff to work at home. There were all sorts of problems accessing VPN because, of course, your virtual private networks, that's that secure tube that you communicate down, weren't designed to have everybody dialing in at the same time. It was really designed for the odd person that was working remotely. So that caused a lot of headaches, particularly for board members. And I also think that, I mean, the pandemic generally has thrust a lot of new responsibilities on the board. But in regards to hacking and cyber attacks, I think board members have really had to get to grips with what it means to have less control over their staff. And if there's been an increased exposure, either to COVID itself or to cybercrime, how have they gone about managing that? So I think the work from home issue, I know a lot of businesses are talking about, returning to work two to 3 days a week. And for me, I see that as again, a heightened exposure, because it's a lot easier to be in one place and to work. When you start sort of logging on to different systems and different platforms, because sometimes you're at home, sometimes you're in the office, that also creates the potential for security breaches. So I do think that it's increased the exposure of board members.
Thanks, Simon. Next question. How are board members now expected to be cyber specialists, especially in line with your discussion about the board members and their liabilities? How do you see that unfolding?
I've certainly seen in bigger businesses that, people that do have technology expertise or qualifications are sitting on boards, and that's encouraging to see. I think in the SME sector, it's challenging, as I mentioned, because the cost of having that kind of person on board is a difficult one to swallow. A lot of the time in smaller businesses, all of the directors have a particular skill that helps to generate income. To employ somebody that's just there to manage risk might not make a lot of sense. So the answer is no, the board members are not expected to be tech experts, but they are expected to contract with tech experts, even if it's not on a permanent basis, so that they can do testing, vulnerability scanning, etc., and figure out what the risks are and how to fix them.
Thanks, Simon. Then we've got a question from Craig Adams. Craig says, I looked into cyber insurance for my small business, but there were a lot of requirements that I needed to comply with. As not an IT person, I had no idea what they wanted. I assume that if you don't have the requirements, then a claim will be repudiated. Your comment, please.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Craig, and it's one of the challenges we had when we were trying to sort of recalibrate cyber to suit the SME sector. So I'm not sure when it was that you applied, but you'll find that most of the insurers have streamlined that onboarding process now for SMEs. I know in our business, we have 17 questions that we ask. They're all yeses and nos. Look, I think one shouldn't ignore the fact that the insurer is always going to require the policyholder to take certain risk management on their own shoulders. Much like you can't get burglary cover if you don't have burglar bars or a security system, the same applies to cyber. But most of the insurers will have a team of people that they can recommend, or a panel that can help get the business back up to speed. What we did at Santam is we packaged antivirus and firewall software with our insurance offering, So we kind of said, well, too many businesses were saying they didn't have these things in place. So we said, well, here it is, it's included in your premium. And if you're interested in cyber, then you kind of get everything packaged together. So probably worthwhile picking that conversation up with your Nedbank broker again, Craig, because I think things have probably changed quite a bit in the last 6 months, never mind in the last couple of years.
Thanks for that.
Sorry, Bruce. I didn't answer a critical part of that question, which was, if you don't have it in place, will the claim be repudiated? Unfortunately, you know, you're probably not going to get the cover in the first place if you don't have that in place. Any business that says that they do and then it transpires that they don't, they are going to jeopardize their cover. That's a reality of the insurance contract. But there's no reason why you can't get up to speed and get the right cover and risk management in place all at the same time.
Thanks, Simon. Another great question from Ryan Manley. When working with suppliers such as Google, Dropbox, etc., who have handled your IT equipment and data storage services and recovery, computer repairs, etc., what would one need to consider to ensure safety of compliance?
Yeah, look, I think when you're dealing with those big tech firms, I mean, you know, even if you're Nedbank, you probably can't negotiate with Google to change their T's and C's. So we're never negotiating in a position of strength contractually. We do, of course, rely on the fact that state-of-the-art security exists in those big tech firms. They're not unhackable. Let's not kid ourselves. But I think, you know, in terms of cloud backups, I personally, in my own environment here at home, I have multiple backups in different sources. You know, so I'll have something going to Dropbox. I've got a time capsule here for my Apple network in the house. So I kind of adopt a belts and braces approach. But having a good security consultant on contract or on your team will help you to achieve that kind of belts and braces approach. Things like multi-factor authentication, doing regular backups, and making sure, of course, that contaminated or infected content isn't making its way into the backups is of course another challenge, and one that can also be managed with some good security technology. So there's quite a bit that can be done. But if the hope was to negotiate something special with Amazon Web Services or with Google, I'm afraid, yeah, we're probably all barking up the wrong tree there. But I hope that answers the question.
Well, thanks, Simon. Just another question. Any insights onto how Poppy is specifically impacted on cybercrime?
Yeah, sorry, I did kind of touch on that in the presentation, but we've seen a spike, and it's not because hackers are just more or attacking South African businesses more often. It's that South African businesses are doing the right thing. I know in the first 3 months of this coming out, there was something like 50 data breaches that were notified to the information regulator. So that sort of medium to large corporate sector are notifying the regulator when it's happening, and that is often published in the media because those businesses want their data subjects to know that they've been breached and that they're doing something about it. Incidentally, if you don't notify the information regulator and you've been hacked, that in itself will attract the fine. And I must just qualify that the information regulator isn't out there to fine businesses who've been hacked, because you will often find that the business has done everything possible to prevent themselves from being hacked, but hackers are incredibly inventive. They've got access to big budgets and big resources in these syndicates, and it doesn't mean that the business is going to get fined just because they suffered an attack. Suffering an attack and not talking about it is almost guaranteed to get a fine.
Thanks, that is quite scary. Then we've got a question from Lynn Fredericks. Lynn says, can employees be fined for Poppy breaches in their personal capacity? The first part of her question, specifically in line with the WFH scenario, or is the risk always sitting with the director?
Yeah, unfortunately, the risk kind of funnels up to the top. So whoever that information officer is, it could be the CEO if there isn't one, is ultimately going to bear the responsibility of that. Because you know, the fact that an employee can actually cause a data breach implies that there's a lack of management or supervisory control, and that is often what we find with a failure of fiduciary duties generally. That the stakeholder, the employee, the customer, whoever says, look, I'm not interested in going after the employee in the accounts department. I think that you haven't been running your business properly, which is why this was allowed to happen. And I'm going after you in your personal capacity. So generally, it goes to the top of the pyramid. Of course, the information officer may be an employee as well. In which case they probably are going to be liable in their personal capacity.
Right, and then we've got time for one last question. Simon, just briefly, why is South Africa a target for cybercrime and cyber criminals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's a combination of things. Probably the biggest driver is the lack of awareness, because you may find that at executive level, people are aware of cyber, but the other people in the organization don't always have proper training. We spend a lot of time and effort having engagement sessions like this with businesses, because as soon as you raise the awareness, it counteracts that. So South Africa is a target, like many other developing countries, because we are very tech enabled. I mean, if you think about the fact that almost every person, if not every person, over the age of like 7 has a mobile device that connects to the internet. So we've got a large prevalence of technology in the country, and a relatively low awareness component. And those two things together lead us to be targeted. And then, of course, the other thing is, on average, we don't spend a lot of money on security. And the hackers know that. So they target us. We are the low-hanging fruit, I guess, which is why we find ourselves in the top 5 of cyber victims.
Thanks, Simon. I think that's time's up for today. I'd just like to thank Christelle and Simon for taking the time out today to spend with us on this very interesting topic. From the perspective, I hope you found this very informative. To you, our client and our customers, thank you very much for dialing in today. Most appreciated. Just in closing, just a reminder, you will receive an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of the conversation starter. Excuse me, just in case you would like to repeat it or have it listened through again. Lastly, your views matter to us, so please help us improve our future webinars by giving us feedback on the survey you'll be receiving. And lastly, thank you very much, and go well and stay safe. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.